Hello and welcome to my presentation on the respiratory system in my fourth and final assignment in anatomy. The respiratory system is a series of structure which is responsible for taking in oxygen and then getting rid of carbon dioxide. The main organs of the respiratory system are the lungs, which help to carry out this exchange of gases when we breathe. On to the next slide. This is slides about the structure of the air passages from the nose to the alveoli. Firstly, nasal cavity. This is where the air enters through the two nostrils. It contains little hairs called cilia which filter the air. It is also lined with mucus which traps inspired dust and antibacterial enzymes which help kill bacteria. Then the epiglottis. This is a flap of cartilage at the top of the larynx. This covers the esophagus when breathing and trachea when swallowing. This helps to ensure that food and air don't go down the wrong way, which people call it. Onto the pharynx. The main role of the pharynx is to link the nasal cavity and mouth with the larynx. This is more commonly known as the throat, and air passes through this part. The larynx. This is more commonly known as the voice box, and this helps to ensure an open airway, and it helps to guide air and food down the correct channels and produces our voice. It is made of cartilage and has a protruding section known as the Adam's apple, which is most commonly found in males, in which you can see more clearly as well. The trachea. This is also known as the windpipe. It splits into two bronchi. It contains C-shaped rings of cartilage to help to support it and keep a clear airway to allow breathing to happen more easily. Bronchus. Bronchus splits off the trachea. It guides the air into each lung, and by the time air reaches here, it is clear of most impurities. With the same amount of air going into each lung, this will mean breathing can be efficient, and it makes sure that air is being transported around our body evenly. Bronchioles. These branch from the bronchi and lead to the alveoli. There are 3 of these in the right lung and 2 in the left lung. These are known as lobar bronchi. Finally, alveoli. These are small grape-like air sacs. There are over 300 million, which allow for a vast surface area, which allow for effective gases exchange to take place. On to the next slide. This is the structure of the lungs. Each lung is divided into lobes. The right lung has 3 lobes, and the left lung has only 2 lobes. And this is to accommodate the heart. If a lobe becomes infected, it allows the rest of the lung to function. So the lobes like to split into 3 parts, and so if one section gets infected and has to be shut down, then there's 2 other parts that can still try to help the lung function. Also, our lungs are surrounded by membranes known as pleura. These contain the pleural cavity and pleural fluids. Their main job is to avoid friction and keep the lungs airtight. Pleural cavity is the space between the 2 membranes where the pleural fluid is stored. Parietal pleura is the outermost of the 2 pleural membranes, and it covers the surface of the lung. Thoracic cavity is the full name for the chamber of the chest that is protected by the thoracic wall. It is protected from the abdominal cavity by the diaphragm. Visceral pleura is the innermost of the two pleural membranes. It covers the surface of the lung. Finally, pleural fluids is a lubricating fluid that allows the lungs to glide over one another easily. Onto functions of the respiratory system. There are two pieces of key terminology we need to know regarding the functions of the respiratory system. These are partial pressure and diffusion. Partial pressure is the pressure exerted by a single gas in a mixture of gases. Diffusion is the movement of a substance from a high area of concentration to an area of low concentration. There are four key terms to do with the functions of the respiratory system. These are oxygen, carbon dioxide, hemoglobin and oxyhemoglobin. Oxygen makes up about 21% of air and we breathe it in for energy production. It is carried via the arteries to the working muscles and anywhere else within our body that requires it. Carbon dioxide makes up under 1%, approximately 0.03% of the air that we breathe in. It is a waste product that needs to be removed from our bodies as soon as possible. It is carried to the lungs via the veins. Hemoglobin is a protein that has a high affinity for oxygen. This combines reversibly with oxygen and is known as the oxygen transporting aspect of red blood cells. Oxyhemoglobin is what hemoglobin is known as when it is bound to oxygen. It helps to carry oxygen to the body's tissue sites when they require it. The past 6 terminologies that I've gone over play a role in the transport of gases around the body. So when we breathe in, we have a higher partial pressure for oxygen, and when we breathe out, we have a higher partial pressure. Yeah, makes sense. When the ignore that. On to the next slide. Mechanisms of breathing. There are 3 main muscles involved in breathing. These are internal intercostal muscles, our external intercostal muscles, and diaphragm. The internal intercostal muscles are on the inside of the ribs, and the external intercostal muscles are on the outside of the ribs. The diaphragm is below the ribs, which is the bottom part of the thoracic cavity. There are also 2 main mechanisms of breathing. These are inspiration and expiration. Inspiration happens when pressure decreases inside the lungs. This will result in air moving into them. This is caused by an increase in the size of the thoracic cavity, and the external intercostal muscles raise the rib cage and the diaphragm flattens. At rest, the diaphragm contracts and moves downwards. The external intercostal muscles contract and the internal intercostal muscles relax. This increases the size of the thoracic cavity and forces air into the lungs. During exercise, the thoracic cavity needs to increase further. Other muscles, such as the pectorals and trapezius, now help to raise the rib cage. This enables the thoracic cavity to expand past the normal resting value of 500 ml. Expiration. This happens due to the elasticity of the lungs rather than the muscle contractions that take place. Therefore, this means that it is a passive process. When the inspiration muscles relax, the ribcage then goes back down and the lungs shrink back to their normal size. At rest, the diaphragm relaxes and returns upwards. The external intercostal muscles also relax. This now entitles the ribs and sternum to put pressure onto the lungs, which means we are able to force the air out of the lungs. During exercise, the internal intercostal muscles will now contract, which will pull the ribcage down, and the abdominals will assist the intercostal muscles in this movement after. This movement forces air out of the lungs. On to our final slide. This is respiratory volumes and breathing control. There are 4 respiratory volumes that we need to know about. These are inspiratory reverse volume, expiratory reverse volume, tidal volume, and residual volume. Inspiratory reverse volume is the amount of space for air to be inhaled. If you breathe in, then stop, the amount of space left in your lungs to allow you to breathe in again is your inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume is the amount of air that can be exhaled following breathing out. Tidal volume is the amount of air breathed in one breath. Residual volume is the amount of air left in the lungs after a full exhalation. It's about 1 litre will always remain in the lungs. This prevents the lungs from deflating. On to breathing control. There are two ways in which we control our breathing. These are chemical control and neural control. Chemical control is controlled by chemoreceptors, which are found in the medulla, aortic arch and carotid arteries. Basically, the chemoreceptors detect a change happening to our carbon dioxide or oxygen levels. So, for example, if our carbon dioxide levels increase, it means we are working harder, and therefore there is a high demand for oxygen, so this means our breathing rate will also have to increase due to this. Neural control is controlled by the nervous system. There are two types of neural control breathing. These are voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary breathing is when we think about breathing ourselves, and when we are breathing voluntary, it is controlled by the cerebral cortex region of the brain. When we breathe involuntary, this type of control is controlled by the medulla oblongata. That's the end.